is the Venture Capital Fast Lane. I am your host, Ryan Else, Managing Partner of Roadster Capital. In the Venture Capital Fast Lane, we will talk about all things fast in venture capital and everything that surrounds it. If it's fast, we're going to talk about it. Growth, exits, funding, cars, rockets, data, software, and much more. We are in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution, so buckle up. This is the Venture Capital Fast Lane. Okay, everybody. So today in the Venture Capital Fast Lane, we're going to speak with an old friend of mine, Martin Tobias. He is based in Seattle, and Martin is the founder of Incisive Ventures, which invests globally as a co-investor in pre-seed software startups. With more than 30 years of experience as an operator, founder, and investor, he has seen it all. Martin is a serial entrepreneur, has worked at Microsoft and Accenture. He was an investor at Ignition, where he helped lead investments in companies such as DocuSign, and he likes going fast in business and on his motorcycle. You can reach him anytime through his website at Incisive VC. Martin, welcome to the Venture Capital Fast Lane.
Hi, Ryan. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, fantastic to have you here. So I just want to give everyone about 1,000-foot overview of how you and I came to know each other. So Martin and I met each other via LinkedIn back in 2020, early pandemic, and he was backing a syndicate that I was running on AngelList at the time, and I had decided to reach out to him about another SPV that I was preparing to launch while sharing thoughts of the fund that I was preparing to raise, but kind of held off on. And then we talked about deal flow, looking for alignment, SPVs, fund life cycles, motorcycles, like surfing, investing later in life, and how early stage investing from his perspective really is a team sport. And so the world as we know it, Martin, has changed a lot prior to 2020, and a lot's changed. So let's dig into it. I'm going to ask you a few questions and we can riff our way through it.
Cool.
So at Incisive Ventures, you invest in technology companies that reduce friction at scale. This is really a great high-level thesis, and it works really well with the current geopolitical environment that we find ourselves in today. And from my perspective, it aligns very well with this fourth industrial revolution that I believe we're in the midst of, as companies and industries are adjusting to new standards that have really been accelerated by the coronavirus pandemic. And there's a need to accelerate the adoption of digitization across industries. So what does reducing friction at scale look like from your perspective as you evaluate investment opportunities?
Well, this is a theme that one of the things I did when the pandemic started is that, I had a bunch of time on my hands. So I sat and looked at all the 200 investments I'd made prior to that directly into companies and the 17 venture funds that I'd done. And I started looking at where I was any good, where I had an internal thesis, like what the outliers were and what was something that I thought I could replicate. And I came up with this idea of reducing friction at scale by looking at a bunch of the best performing companies in my 200 investments. Probably the most emblematic of it would be a company like DocuSign. The idea of DocuSign is you can sign things on your phone instead of back then when they started, it was a fax machine with a wet signature and stuff like that. And so the idea of reducing friction is it's easier to do it with software than the old way. And at scale, there's millions of signatures on millions of contracts every day. So both those things have to be true. So I said about 3 years ago, let me go try to look for companies that do that. And it's a little bit sector agnostic. I've found them in all sorts of sectors. For example, I was a pre-seed investor in OpenSea. I am not primarily a crypto investor, but what I do know is that marketplaces reduce friction in marketplaces at scale. And so the only question in OpenSea was, do you need a new marketplace to sell this asset class, or could Amazon or eBay do it? Turns out you needed a new marketplace. There were some technical reasons for that. Then the second question is simply, how big is that asset class going to be? If you're the number one marketplace, you're the house, you're taking a 5% rake on every transaction. It frankly doesn't matter where the asset price goes up or down. You're making you're the house in that game. And so I understood how to be the house in that game and how being the house can enable a market to exist, can reduce friction. Prior to OpenSea, buying NFTs was a pain in the ass. You had to, have a wallet and plug things in and all this trust. Anyway,
Yeah.
so that was another idea. Another company that I invested in the depths of the pandemic, which I mean, to your point, I'm glad you pointed out that the pandemic pulled forward a lot of software investments that would have otherwise been delayed. We all know what we're talking about now, Zoom and things like that. But one that took me a little bit by surprise, I invested in this company called Portside, which is a vertical market software company for private airplane owners. And I was thinking in the middle of the pandemic, airplanes, are you kidding me? Like, what, who wants to invest in anything to do with airplanes? But it turns out that the owners of private airplanes, like NetJets and corporate owners and stuff like that, had to all of a sudden get much more efficient about operating those assets because, it was harder to operate those assets. And the way they had done it in the past was spreadsheets, and they were still in 2020, like faxing the FAA a flight plan.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm not a pilot by training in any way, but I do happen to drive by Phil Knight's hangar with the Nike jets in it every couple of weeks, and it's impressive seeing those jets. And when you drive by these small regional airports, there's a lot more than big, Gulf Streams hanging around. There's a lot of small jets, and there's a lot of aviation. There's definitely going to be a need to simplify a lot of those processes. They even have now when you park in a city, you can download an app. Out here in Portland, we have Hello Kit. I think it's called Parking Kitty, and you can put this app on your phone so you pay. At these regional airports now, they have painted on the ground signs that allow you to pay for the parking of your plane through an app while you're there, so you don't have to go into the clubhouse or whatever they call it at the airport and hand over $20 in cash or $200 for however long you're going to stay. But yeah, it's really great seeing outliers like that.
That one's been doing very well. Yeah. They basically brought a modern airplane management platform to something that was spreadsheets and PDF files, and it automated maintenance schedules and flight plans and weight and balances and all of this kind of thing. Anyway, they since the pandemic, they've been growing 300% year over year. They've been profitable for 3 years. Tiger did a big up round. They just raised another round from Insight Ventures. The company's doing great.
That's fantastic.
I love those kind of vertical market software apps because, to your point, you call it the fourth industrial revolution. One of the trends I'm tracking which I think is part of that, is the verticalization of software, the replacement of general purpose software platforms with vertical software platforms. Anywhere somebody's using Excel and has written a bunch of custom models, you can write now, because it's so cheap with no code solutions and cloud providers and everything, to create a specific application. The reason why people didn't create specific applications 10 years ago is it was too expensive. But today you can create specific applications to replace spreadsheets and Word documents and shared common things, and do a workflow much better because it's so cheap to create apps. And that is a trend I'm investing a lot in, is the replacement of the generalized software with specific vertical software that solves a specific problem. And that's back to my thesis of reducing friction. Vertical market software needs to do a better job at some business process than the duct taped together way that people are doing it today.
Yeah, and I would think the founders of vertical specific problems, they would be best suited to have someone on their team, if not the founder, who was working directly in that industry for a prolonged period of time, so they can really internally work through some of those real difficult challenges that they face without having to have a boatload of customers on board out of the gate.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the exciting things for me too, is that looking at vertical market software applications, tend to meet a lot of founders that are deep into their industry, and they may not be technical founders. In fact, they're usually hiring developers to write their software for them. I just did one which was in construction work site management. It was basically like a Slack for field construction workers, to communicate to the plumbers and the framers on the job site to get their questions answered, to how to finish their jobs and get supplies to them, basically to improve field worker productivity in a construction site. And in a lot of ways, it's kind of a real-time communication platform like Slack for office workers, except everybody in construction is in the field and has a mobile phone.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I love the trades. Years ago, I worked for Weyerhaeuser Building Materials and managed some global or some national programs for them, and definitely spent a lot of time on a number of different job sites, both concrete tilt-ups and commercial residential real estate. And there's definitely a need for a lot of that. There's a lot of wasted time, wasted materials that takes place on these job sites. So tools like that that are specific to the vertical make a difference.
Yeah, and many times it's just a communication thing. A plumber guy goes out there and is told to put a toilet in and the hole's in the wrong place, and he asks somebody a question, and he sits there and waits for 3 hours till somebody answers his question. Just wasted time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And he's not reading Sports Illustrated. He's flipping through something on his cell phone, looking at someone on Instagram, probably.
But anyway, yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of industries that are pretty laggard, and I invest in fintech as well, and health tech, in part because those industries are what I call sort of second comer industries. Like there's been a lot of IT investment in healthcare, but much of it is getting to be like 20 years old. I just invested in a company that's creating a new clinic management software for PT clinics. The number one software in that business was written in 1980.
Wow.
And it's literally still Visual Basic. And so, you've got some pretty mature software that is owned by hedge funds that are collecting cash that are not interested in innovating. Those are industries that are really ripe for modern platforms, cloud, this and that.
Yeah, those are the industries that have to catch up and pull forward and adapt to a digitized world.
Their investment.
Yeah,
maybe they were early adopters, but they delayed. It's like I haven't quite found an investment in this one yet, but I would love to find something in commercial airplane ticketing. You saw what happened with Southwest Airlines. Their system went down. Do you know what they're running that on? They're running it on a mainframe, an IBM mainframe from like 1985.
Yeah, yeah, I can.
And there's literally like 3,000 people in the world who know how to work on that thing.
Right. Well, it's still there because someone was wanting to keep their job. They wouldn't let anyone come in and sell them anything new.
Someone wanted to keep their job, and it was customized, and it's really fast and volume, and it's IBM, and you don't get fired for IBM. But eventually, that shit gets old.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so speaking of things getting old and moving into new stuff, let's touch a little bit on AI at a high level, and you can go into it as much as you want. But what a time to be alive. Back in 2018, Kai-Fu Lee released a book that I read called AI Superpowers. It's called like China, Silicon Valley, and the New World Order. Did you ever read that book or hear about it?
I didn't read it, but I saw it in your notes, and I purchased it on Amazon, so I'm looking forward to reading it.
Okay, you're going to get a kick out of it. This was really an open letter to warn people of the changes that will come from the advances in AI. And I heard about it through Jason Calacanis. And he and Kai-Fu, they play poker together. They're poker pals. So anyways, Sam Altman started OpenAI, and he launched that ChatGPT in November of 2020. And this Kai-Fu Lee is a mastermind of all things AI. He had to know a bit about what was going on early on, but maybe not so much. And, Microsoft just recently did a $10 billion investment into that company in January of 2023, which was a follow-on because they've been investing in OpenAI for a few years now, right? So, he spoke really favorably about China's advances in AI, and I think in part because he is Chinese and he does live in China, but it felt to me as if he wasn't really telling the full truth. And I also don't think he was forecasting a pandemic that would get to a zero COVID policy in China that would prevent
Yeah.
rapid, progress, as China has been good at in all things AI and robotics. But I mean, what do you think is kind of going on around all of this AI and Chat GPT? Do you think that, with their relationship with Microsoft Azure, I mean, they've really ignited an arms race in cloud supercomputing. I mean, AWS and Google have to just be, quaking in their pants. I mean, you worked at Microsoft a while back. How do you think this investment and partnership will impact the company and maybe even the world moving forward?
Well, thanks for that. I don't know much about the potential threat from China, and I think China, lost a few steps with the COVID stuff. I'm interested to figure out, to hear like what his thoughts are on how China could compete on some of these large language models. But frankly, they haven't been traditionally really that competitive in cloud services and large language models and things like that. I mean, you could argue that they're pretty good at algorithms because of TikTok, and that's kind of an AI algorithm giving you what you want. But specifically on AI and Microsoft, I think it was brilliant. Satya has done an amazing job there at Microsoft, and he's getting them in all the right trends. And frankly, I've actually used Bing a couple times in the last couple of weeks because of that chat thing. And Google has something like 82% of share in search or something like that.
Right.
Microsoft doesn't have to get too many points. If they get 5 points of share away from Google, it'll be a huge win. It'll be a 500% increase in their market share. So, I think they really needed to do it, and it's working. I think people are talking about Microsoft again in a way that they haven't. It was brilliant. And I also know that Google has their own project, Lambda, which they are being quite more cautious about. And I understand why they're being more cautious, because the bar for a Google product is much higher, frankly, than the bar for a challenger product from Amazon, from Microsoft. Microsoft knows they've got to do anything, so people will put up with it saying stupid things or giving wrong answers. And I think Google's waiting. What is interesting to me is, and I'm sure for you as a pre-seed or seed investor, is what's the opportunity for funds like ours to invest in startups? And I do not think it is we missed OpenAI, if we'd have been in the pre-seed of OpenAI, maybe, but in the large language models, in the core, speech to text recognition and all of that stuff, I think that it is not going to be startups. In just like the cloud is owned by the three or four big companies, in terms of compute power and storage and stuff like that. I think AI, large language models, are going to be owned by the same people. But at the same time, there's going to be 10x the value created in the application layer. If you just look at what's happened, in the application layer of the cloud, companies like Dropbox are worth a lot of money, and they're using underlying Microsoft or Google, right? Their application layers on top of these general things. And that's how I think of AI, is that it is a general purpose tool for which people, again, will build vertical market software solutions that solve specific problems, and you'll get paid a lot of money to solve a specific problem. And, that's the real opportunity, I think, for startups, is to take some of these general technologies and improve. And even, people like you mentioned, Jason and, on the All In podcast, they were talking about this 2 weeks ago. And there's going to be a lot of money made by people who can provide that additional 5 or 10% of accuracy in a language model, because they have some proprietary data. Like,
Yeah.
If AI today from ChatGPT can get 85% accurate answering certain medical questions, if you can give it a database and train it to get another 10% accurate to 95%, people will pay a lot of money for that remaining additional accuracy.
Yeah, because you definitely want to zero in on those true points of inflection that that really level up something that exists and make it marketably different. I mean, nobody wants to buy something that is equally as good as what they already have. It has to be at least 3 times better. The turn rate has to be better. And these are going to be like custom mods, right? I mean, you're going to be working on something that exists and building something on top of it that works infinitely better for that specific use case. And then, we're also going to find something somewhere along the line that pops up that is completely out of the box new. And that will be made possible because of advances in AI tools to help us better understand how we ask questions, how we frame questions, and how we solve for those problems that sets within those questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think one thing that's going to happen with this AI, with these AI models, which people are not quite talking about yet, but it's going to slow things down a bit, is the whole area around IP and attribution. If you ask ChatGPT today what the 3 best restaurants in Seattle are for Thai food, it'll give you 3 restaurants. It learned that by reading Open Table and other reviews, and it does not link to those places. So it's using the IP of another website without attribution and without revenue at things. So anyway, there's going to be a giant fight about who gets paid by those answers, and it's going to be litigated for a very long time. And I think that's going to slow down some things, which is also why I think if you have proprietary data that you can feed a model and monetize that model with proprietary data without any IP issues, you'll be able to do a better job. Let me give an example of a company that I just invested in, which is solving a vertical market problem, and that is in customs clearance. They're using optical character recognition to read PDF files of bills of lading, and then using AI models to automatically fill out the customs clearance forms in different countries. And this was a manual process that people in rooms were doing, opening emails and trying to transcribe. It was very error prone. And they had to write a whole bunch of very specific models and transcribing things and upgrades to the standard things. But anyway, they've gotten to like 99% accuracy, and they reduce approximately 95% of the customs clearance time from the traditional manual way of doing it. This thing pays for itself in like a day.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think back to the litigation around data, use of data, and how it's implemented, what you were speaking to, it brought me back in time to think about digital rights management and how artists in the music industry dealt with all of this as, Steve Jobs, brought iTunes to the world. It did slow things down a lot. But at the same time, it forced an industry to adopt and come forward, and maybe it's for the better.
Well, frankly, I was involved in that industry. I was running a company called Laudai Technologies, which was a streaming media service provider at the time. And prior to Apple coming out with iTunes and cutting a deal with the record labels, it was the Wild West, like MP3 rippers and MP3.com, and people were stealing things, running their own servers and all that stuff. And frankly, what Apple did is they came into that hectic, unsecure environment, and they told the record labels, we'll be your savior. Like, we'll actually put security around your IP, protect them. We'll have a walled garden. We'll make people pay. And I know you may not like how much you have to pay me, but right now you've got
Napster. Yeah, it was like deal with Napster and everything that comes with it, or Bertelsmann AG. We're going to save your ass.
And Apple basically saved them and created a monopoly for themselves in the process. But they saved them. They created a business model. The labels kind of complained a little bit about the split, but at the end of the day, it was a business model that got them back to making money. And
fast forward all the way to today, and we're starting to see musicians, even young guys like Justin Bieber or Bruce Springsteen, selling all of their music rights.
Uh-huh.
right? Selling them off because they know that it's challenging to be a musician now with a lot of that. I mean, you're no longer really selling albums. You're kind of selling
No,
single hits. So you got to
single
change the
hits,
way
and
you
you're
release the
getting
data.
streaming royalties and some complicated formula that nobody understands. The primary way you make money in music today is if you have a live show. You can still make money doing
Yeah,
live shows, but there's very few artists that are big enough to have the big live shows. If you can go play Coachella, you're fine, but that's a very small number.
yeah, but then Ticketmaster gets in the middle, and you have the whole
Yep.
debacle we're dealing with right now. All right, great, how cool! I had no idea you were at, was it Loudstream? What a cool Loud Eye.
Loud Eye
Sorry,
Technologies.
how
Yeah.
cool is that? I had no idea. So, all right. So my next question for you, you and I, we met through AngelList. I had that syndicate and you had a microfund on the platform, but over time, both of us, we found ourselves moving away from AngelList in search of a more traditional fund structure. And we both participated, correct me if I'm wrong, but we both participated in the VC Lab Fund Accelerator.
Yep.
So, like, what was that aha moment for you that led you to walk away from AngelList and really take control of your fund's future?
Well, I really appreciated the ease of use that AngelList had in the beginning. They brought me a lot of LPs that I didn't have before. It was a fair deal. It was an easy deal by deal carry only structure. The software is fairly good. Unfortunately, their business model is to steal 25% of the carry from the managers over the life of the LP. And if you're going to be doing this business for more than just a year, as a side gig when you're in college, that begins to be a material amount of money. So I really didn't want AngelList in the middle of 10 years of carry for work that I am doing myself. And that's the primary reason. The secondary reason is frankly because I started talking to some limited partners, and I'm an LP in 17 funds, traditional funds. And when you talk to some of the larger LPs, and you tell them that you're thinking about running your thing on AngelList, they're like, "Isn't AngelList the junior leagues?" There is a little bit of a for LPs that write 1 million or more dollar checks, they just have this impression that the traditional fund structure is for professional venture capitalists, and AngelList is for non-professional part-timers. And you just have to decide, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I decided I wanted to, be a full-time capital allocator in the venture ecosystem, and that led me to more of a traditional fund structure versus AngelList.
Yeah, for me it was similar. I mean, it worked out to be an incredible platform for me to structure SPVs in a period of time when I was having difficulty raising a fund one, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, well, if they have this SPV product and they have the back office, it's worth a little bit of carry to me now, so I can kind of get my feet wet and figure things out. And luckily for me, I knocked one out of the park right away, and I have a big unicorn under my belt, right? So they stood me up from that regard. But as I started digging into it and seeing a lot of the noise and realizing that a lot of the backers of the syndicate that I had were more tire kickers than they were truly accredited investors, sure, I started to kind of pound my head against the table and say, wait a second, this just doesn't fly. And I was targeting in the long run to like build a strong firm and be a long-term allocator for the rest of my life. That's what I want to do. Yeah. And I figured after talking to a few people that, like you, the big institutions weren't going to be there. And I started hearing a lot of this, that, and the other. And I said to myself, well, why don't I ask a couple institutional LPs if they would do it? And they all said no. So that was it for me. I knew that I couldn't take this easy route as it may have seemed to me at the time. And so I dug in. And along the way, after making some beautiful mistakes, I came across VC Lab and dug in there, and really, in doing so, forced myself to reevaluate everything and dig even deeper. And it turned out to be one of the best moves I ever made. It was my big aha moment, and like, I'm off to the races, having some good success now. So I'm excited for what's to come for both of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Congrats. And
Yeah.
I really appreciated the VC Lab program as well. Even though I'd been investing for 25 years, I had never stood up my own venture capital firm. And AngelList sort of obfuscates a lot of that. You don't have to understand any of it. I learned something new every day in that program. And the other difference between AngelList and your own fund is technically on AngelList, you're not the GP.
That's right.
AngelList is the GP. You're technically a sub-advisor. And the reason a lot of LPs don't like it is that the person they're giving their money to is not in control of the money. There's this third party person called AngelList that if there's any legal dispute, they have to deal with. So they're not actually investing in the manager. There's this other person. So that's the tidbit that a lot of LPs really want to solve for, is to invest in a manager who's actually the GP and the legal owner of the operating entities and legally responsible for every decision that's made.
Well, you nailed it on the head. That is the misconception that so many who are doing it that way have. I mean, you are not the sole signatory on your fund. When something needs to be done, you have to go somewhere else. So if time is of the essence, you're at the mercy of them. And I don't want to go off the rails, but bottom line is, it just felt a lot better to do it on my own and own it all.
It is, and LPs appreciate that too, because any kind of conflict situations, they can deal with the person who can make the decision.
Exactly. And you and I both know that. I mean, you were saying right before we got going here today, we ought to speak a little bit about, the value that a seasoned executive or operator brings to a pre-seed founder, regardless of their experience. You want to speak a little bit about that from your perception?
Yeah, so we've just come off of probably a 10 or 12-year bull market in venture capital. And basically up and to the right during all of this ZERP thing, with a little bump in 2020 because of the pandemic. And but for investors like you and me who've been doing it for a while, I went through the crash of 2000. I took my company public in 2000. I went through the crash of 2008, the crash of 2020. And I understand the cyclical nature of this. And one of the things I've really noticed is that a lot of new managers who come into venture in the last sort of 3, 4, or 5 years, this is the first downturn they've ever experienced. And many CEOs, it may be the first time they've ever had a hard time raising money or hiring people or getting customers. And frankly, having investor partners who've seen those cycles and understand how to manage through those and give advice that is related to the stage that you're in, I think it's more important than ever. For example, one of the things I'm doing now is in pre-seed is I am encouraging founders to raise 18 to 24 months worth of money. Until November of last year in pre-seed, you could pretty reliably raise 6 to 12 months worth of money, because every 6 months you could raise more money. That is not the environment we're in anymore. And I still see some founders trying to raise 6 to 12 months worth of money in today's environment. And my advice, I certainly don't do those deals. And my advice to them is, listen, we're not in a free money environment anymore. You need to understand that. And it's taking some time for some of them to understand that. But I mean, I think guys like me and you can understand the shifting environment quicker because we've seen it before. And I really encourage founders now to seek out investors who've been through a couple of cycles, because we're definitely in a very different cycle than we were 12 months ago.
Yeah, we are. I mean, there are a lot of companies out there that were founded pre-seed during pandemic, and they were not doing as you're suggesting. And many of them right now are sitting on 4-5 months runway.
Yeah.
And they're really nervous. And yeah. it takes more time, and they're kind of stuck with a valuation that they raised at back then, and their ego is in the way. They don't want to come down. And then you have the whole essence of dirty term sheets or looking for multipliers and you know,
Right. So
payouts.
the
It's
primary
getting.
reason I tell pre-seed founders who are raising today, the brand new companies starting, why they need to raise 18 to 24 months is that I'm like, you don't want to be having to raise in 6 months or 12 months because 6 or 12 months from now, all of these zombies that you're talking about are going to be in the market with a year and a year and a half more traction than you have, willing to take any price. So your new company's competing against these, zombies. And frankly, some of those zombies are going to be good investments because they have more traction and they can be repriced and recapitalized. So
That's right.
that's why I think the pre-seed environment is going to get harder because there are going to be people with greater traction, but not enough traction to get a seed round, trying to get a pre-seed extension done, and those guys are competing with brand new companies, and they're going to end up getting the same price.
And the other thing is there is a significant amount of dry powder in the market, but like Josh over at Lux says, I mean, it's kind of wet powder. I mean, a lot of it is already allocated, and knowing that prices have changed, and if you can find your winners and prices have changed, you're going to double down in there, and you're not going to give it to someone else that's kind of in a pinch. So, yeah, if you can raise that 18 months right now, you better get on it and take it while you can get
Take
it.
it, yeah. Even if it's a little more dilution than you want, raise more money because I have pretty high confidence that 18 months from now we'll be through the repricing zombie apocalypse, but it's going to be a very challenging time for the next 6 months as these companies and VCs try to figure out what the right price is for these companies that raised at bubble valuations last year.
Well, speaking of those bubble valuations, what are you seeing right now as a good entry point valuation in a pre-seed market or seed market?
Well, seed is, I just did a post on this on my blog, how I define different phases, seed, pre-seed, and everything. I define angel round as raising $500,000 pre-product, pre-revenue. I define pre-seed as a company raising 500,000 to 1.5 million with a product already in the marketplace for at least 3 months and generating about $5,000 or $10,000 a month of revenue. I define seed as starting at a $500,000 ARR run rate, and that's where most seed funds today are telling me they're wanting to take meetings is once you've gotten to $500,000 of ARR. So pre-seed is really underwriting that sort of $50,000 ARR to $500,000 ARR number. These are, of course, for B2B SaaS companies. There's different metrics for different kinds of companies. But seed rounds are getting done at no more than 20x revenue. So if you're $500,000, that's a $10 million valuation,
Oh yeah.
which means pre-seeds need to be done at half of that. And I've done 4 investments in the new fund, and one was a $2 million post, the other was a $3 million post, the other was a $3.5 million post, and the other one was a $7 million post.
Yeah. So at pre-seed.
Pre-seed.
Hmm.
So they have a product, they have some revenue, on about a $100,000 a month run rate or a year run rate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's good insight for a lot of people to keep in mind when they're reaching out to you or anyone else, because I think that is a mantra that many funds are starting to stick to right now in this current environment, and I think they have every right to do that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's very different from a year ago because a year ago people were asking for 10 for a pre-product, pre-revenue company. And I'm not doing those deals. I'm still seeing some CEOs try to ask that. But the problem is that deal is competing now with a company that's on a 500,000, $500,000 a year run rate that's been around for a year and a half at the same $10 million valuation. I'm seeing literally companies with 50 times more traction at the same valuation, which makes it difficult for guys like you and me to decide. But frankly, it's not that difficult because we do the better valuation to traction metric thing. At least I do.
Yeah, yeah, I do
Right.
that too. Yeah.
Like
I mean, as a
I want to
fiduciary,
buy the most traction for the lowest valuation that I can.
yeah, if you're a fiduciary for your LP, a good fiduciary, and your objective is to return your fund, that metric has to be on your desk at your right hand every minute of the day for everything you look at.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Well, so let me brag a little bit about you. So you have invested, and we've kind of touched on some of this, but you've invested in over 250 companies, four
Yeah.
unicorns in there. You helped
Yeah.
lead the Series A for DocuSign when you were an investor at Ignition. You've been the CEO, and you've raised over 500 million with is this correct? Three IPOs for your own
Uh,
businesses,
two IPOs for my own companies.
two
Yeah.
for your own, and one for another.
Yeah.
So, like, what would you say has been the best takeaway from all of this experience that could really help people today who are leading teams or founding a startup of their own?
It's never a wrong decision to jump in and start a company. The two greatest wealth events that I had were when I was CEO and starting my own companies. Um, and even if it doesn't work out to become a great wealth event, it's a better education than you're going to get anywhere. And you're going to meet amazing people. You're going to have more purpose to your life. Like if you have any inkling of starting something, I would say just start it and worry about it later. You can always go back and work at Microsoft if it doesn't work out.
I think that's really strong advice. You just have to take that first step, and you are going to learn a lot more than you'll learn anywhere else. You can learn a lot in a lot of places. That's always valuable and are all great accomplishments. But starting a business on your own, no matter what it might be, is it's a whole new world of learning and experiences that can be applied to your life and can impact others in really good ways. So yeah,
Right.
take the
Yeah, it's
plunge.
everywhere because you basically gotta, if you're the CEO, founder, or whatever, you gotta wear a bunch of hats. I mean, if you're working at a big tech company, you're probably doing a specific job. I mean, they want to hire specialists to do specific things, and you might be a super expert on one thing. But when you start a company, you have to be a generalist. Even if you're fundamentally a technical person, you got to figure out how to do HR and pay people and buy insurance and get hire outside developers and install a CRM system. I mean, it's the multi-hat thing, and that's where you learn is that you're forced out of your comfort zone to do lots of things because there's never enough people and there's never enough money, and that's kind of forced education, which I personally think is a lot of fun.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So let me ask you a couple fun questions here as we kind of get to the tail end of our discussion here today. So, do you have a favorite movie quote or mantra that you like to live by?
I'm a big fan of The Matrix. Would you like the red pill or the blue pill?
I love that. Yes, definitely a big fan. I was on set for Matrix back in 2020 when they were filming the most recent one, very
Yeah.
briefly in San Francisco, and I saw Keanu Reeves walking down an alleyway, and I thought, I wonder how many eyes are on this guy right now. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's such a great movie. Everything about that is a fantastic movie.
It is a fantastic story. And I actually have, when I was a CEO, I made my whole company watch it because I think it's a metaphor for life and for, attacking the machine and waking up to the true purpose in life and things like that.
Right on. So my final question for you here is, what comes to mind when you think of going fast? And it can be anything.
um, for me, it's on a motorcycle. I really like my Harley, and I like to be going fast through the mountains.
Right on. How cool is that? Tell me a little bit about your Harley.
Well, I've got four of them. but the one that I ride most is my Road King, which is a bagger and has a windshield on it. And I did a whole bunch of upgrades on it, of course, to make it go faster. I put a new cam in it and exhausts and all of that stuff. And it's got a huge engine in it. But I can also ride two people, so my wife and I like to take it to dinner sometimes.
Oh, how exciting.
One of the reasons I love motorcycles versus cars is it gets a little bit back into the matrix thing. Like you're in the environment, you're smelling everything that goes by. If it's raining, if it's windy, you have to pay a lot more attention and be present on a motorcycle. You can't zone out and listen to the radio or you'll freaking die. So it forces you. For me, riding a motorcycle is very much like a meditation. Even and especially if you're going fast, because you have to pay attention when you're going fast, a lot, because you're going to die. And so it's a forced meditation that you don't get in a lot of times in regular life, because you can just zone out. You're driving a car to Starbucks, you can zone out and listen to the radio. You cannot do that riding fast on a motorcycle.
No, you cannot. Well, I thank you for that analogy. I think that's really, really cool. So that'll do it for us. Thank you, Martin, for driving in the fast lane with me. And until next time, I'm your host, Ryan Else, and this is the Venture Capital Fast Lane.